before I forget, because we are so excited to have Lynn Stone speaking for us today, as I know you all are. And I know we have people from literally all over the world joining us today. And many of you will be watching the recording because this didn't work with your time zone. So we're glad to have you joining. So I'm Lynn Carpenter. I am the president of the Reading League New York, but I am not who you're here to listen to. So I'm just going to move that on. I just get to share a name with our fantastic speaker. So I'm just going to do a brief bio, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lynn. So meet Lynn Stone. Lynn's job is to use research, evidence, and linguistics to produce programs, methods, and texts for students, teachers, and educators worldwide. Lynn gained her, oh, please do, by the way, put where you're from in the, and drop it in the chat, because I'm so curious how many countries we have on right now. I apologize. Lynn gained her linguistics degree at University College London and worked in a variety of speech and language settings in Australia since graduating in 1994. She is also trained in Makaton, Ausland, Read Write Inc., Little Learners Love Literacy, Explicit Direct Instruction, and Spalding. Sorry, I'm doing double duty. Lynn has been in private practice since 1998 and has continued to train and mentor teachers while developing her linguistics-led learning programs. Her busy tutoring practice has overseen the training and mentoring of many fine practitioners over the last 2 decades and continues to help hundreds of students in Australia and overseas of all ages fill in their gaps of literacy. Lynn's Gym Jam Gang series, developed free of charge over COVID lockdown since 2020, has been viewed by tens of thousands of children and adults all over the world. She is an experienced public speaker with many radio and print media appearances. Her first book, Spelling for Life, Uncovering the Simplicity and Science of Spelling, was released in 2013, followed by Language for Life, Where Linguistics Meets Teaching, and Reading for Life, High Quality Literacy Instruction for All. As we're going along, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. And without further ado, I'm thrilled to turn it over to Lynn Stone.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Lynn. Good name. Good name, but you've got an extra N there, so I don't know what's going on with that. Yeah, I actually do know what's going on with that. That's my job. Welcome, everybody. Thank you. Gosh, there's people from everywhere, and it's lovely to see some familiar faces as well. If you do have your camera, put it on. It doesn't. I've found out that it doesn't actually make any difference to the signal. So go ahead and do that if you like. But I will say, if you wouldn't mind muting yourselves, that would be really good. I think everybody's done that, but sometimes I hear a little bit of stuff in the background. What I'm going to do now is share my presentation with you, and we will get on with it. So I've called this Speaking and Spelling Two Different Beasts. And the reason that I've called it that, and the reason I speak about these two different beasts, is because I keep having to say, well, the thing is, speaking and spelling aren't the same. They are two different beasts. And when I mean beasts, when I talk about beasts, I mean entities, linguistic entities that are subject to different pressures, different forces, different changes over time, and so on. So what this talk is going to be about is about how speaking and spelling differ, because I hear a lot of foundational statements when children are being taught to read and write, which say things like speaking and spelling are a reversible process, implying that speaking and spelling are the same thing. One is just out loud, one is on paper, and they're actually two different beasts. Now, you can also see from my illustrations, I like playing around with AI. I'm not sure I'm a huge AI fan at this point, but I'm an early adopter. So if you have a look at their wonderful hands, AI is terrible at generating hands. So, you know, don't be put off by that. But this is my speaking dragon, and this is my spelling dragon, my two different beasts, and they're very different. It was a wonderful introduction that I received there from Lynn, but I definitely want to talk a little bit about what I do and how I got to this point where I'm saying speaking and spelling are two different beasts. First of all, first and foremost, I'm a linguist, so I studied the structure of language at university. I have a bachelor's degree, right, in linguistics. But what I did with that bachelor's degree is that I went straight into education and worked in clinics where children and adults were struggling with reading and writing. So that's the first thing that I did. So if we look at this wheel, all the things that I do and how I got to saying the things that I'm saying, it started with students. It started with working with children who struggled. In the training that I had, and I've had extensive training, I try to go to everything that I possibly can because I like to see what's out there and I like to get new ideas about how to help students who struggle. I kept finding that there were not flaws, but there were gaps. There were places where I would hit against a problem that children were having acquiring and building their lexicon, because that's what we're all involved with when it comes to literacy. We want children to build a robust lexicon, a store of words that they can instantly and effortlessly recognize and instantly and effortlessly put back onto paper so that they can express themselves through writing. I kept finding that there were gaps in the knowledge that my training had provided. And so to fill those gaps, I started to write books. I started to write pieces of paper, basically handouts and so on, which became books. And so I've got books on spelling and syntax and the reading wars, and there's a writing book coming out at some point. From that, I created programs. So I like to share what works or what's working for us with others. And then that led me into being a school coach. So I travel the world and go into schools to help them apply things that work to whole systems. Sometimes I have other people who come and speak for me as well because I can't be good at everything, right? So education is this huge rabbit hole. There's this thing called the science of learning, not just the science of reading, but learning as well. And that's not my training. So I have other people who come in and speak for me. And so I run these masterclasses as well. That then helps me to teach students better, to write better books, create better programs, and coach schools better. And that's how it all goes. Now, as you can see from my illustrations here, I'm also a very proud dragon wrangler. So this is the year of the dragon. And throughout my career, throughout the resources that I've been putting together, I've had this theme of dragons. It all started with a syntax program and book that I have called Language for Life, where we parse a sentence, my big green dragon slowly ate the teacher on a bridge. So that dragon came about. And then you may have gone onto my website or Teachers Pay Teachers and seen the decoding dragon. So this was something else that I brought into existence. The decoding dragon here is chasing the guessing monster away, and the guessing monster is made up of all of those weird range of strategies that children often are taught to do when they come to an unfamiliar word. So there's the guessing monster. And then I have a technique for learning words and putting them all together in sentences and so on called the 4-step process. And that's very dragon oriented as well. If you're a social media type, then my Twitter handle is Lifelong Lit. That's where I do lots of my thinking and learning these days. All right, let's get on with it though. Speaking and spelling, two different beasts. So there we've got the speaking dragon and the spelling dragon. We're going to tackle 4 specific questions today. The first question is, where do they overlap? Because no one is saying that speaking and spelling don't overlap. Of course they do. The questions that we're going to look at further, though, are where don't they overlap? We also need to think about who's saying they're the same beast. Are people saying that? Well, the answer is yes. I see it all the time. And I'm going to show you some examples of high quality, very popular approaches to teaching reading who say that speaking and spelling are the same beast. So the same beast, they don't use those words, but there are words like reversible processes, encoding and decoding, back and forth like this. They're the same thing. Well, that's not quite true. And I hope that after today, after the talk that I'm doing and the conversations that we have together, I hope that you maybe see that a little more clearly. We also need to think about this question. Why does it matter? Why don't we just teach that encoding and decoding, speaking and spelling are the same thing, and that if you can do one, you can do the other? Why does it matter? Because lots and lots of children will learn to read with very little explicit instruction. So why does it matter? Why do I care? Let's start with where they overlap. I've got this diagram here. This is how I think about the English writing system. It's just something that I put together to help me think about it. As you can see, there's a sequential part here, one letter, one sound, additional common sounds and letter combinations. They build cumulatively in any good phonics program. But there are other layers to this system, which I've put here as a wheel or a set of principles going round and round rather than being in a hierarchy. So where speaking and spelling overlap are these places. When you've got the alphabet, right, A to Z, when you're teaching the default phoneme, grapheme correspondences, the simple ones, you know, one letter for one sound. So the letter A, it's a really good idea to introduce the letter A and the formation of the letter A and the sound that it makes in words most commonly. And that sound is A, right? And we can do that from A to Z, A to Z, right? However, there are, of course, additional common sounds that letters make too. So there are common additional correspondences. As we know, especially with vowels, vowels can make that default sound, but they can also say their names when they're in words and make and say fine language to use, not a problem at all. If you're frank and honest about it. Common additional correspondences like the letter A can also say its name in words. There's a specific reason why it says its name, why vowels will say their name. There are specific reasons why even consonants will change their sound, like the letter C and G. They change their sounds. They have additional common sounds as well. Speaking and spelling overlap nicely there. Also, we combine letters, don't we? So we take letters like S and H and we form digraphs like sh. Again, this is speaking and spelling overlapping. And what I've circled here, well, that's your basic phonics scope and sequence. If that's what you're teaching in the first couple of years of school, that is fantastic. It's a great foundation for reading and writing. And I think we have plenty of research to show that that is indeed the case. It's certainly a much, much better approach teaching these things than not having a system and maybe asking children to do that range of strategies that the guessing monster is made of. You know, when you come to an unfamiliar word, don't sound it out. Don't use your letter sound knowledge. Just guess what's there. Could be a picture that will help you, or you can skip the word, or you can look at the first letter. This is a far, 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 far better approach. And that's phonics, systematic synthetic phonics. However, there are other pieces of this puzzle. And I'm really, really glad to see that those other pieces of the puzzle, the orthographic expectancies, the uncommon spellings, morphology and etymology, I'm really glad to see that there's quite a groundswell of interest in those parts. Let's also think about the question, where don't they overlap? Where do speaking and spelling not overlap? Well, basically everywhere else, all right? The default grapheme phoneme correspondences are where they overlap, but everywhere else they don't. Aside from motor planning, expressive language, posture, grip, paper position, right? So these are all things that you need to have your working memory juggling when you're spelling, especially when you're a novice, when you're writing things on a piece of paper. You've got to think about all of those things as well. They are going to take up space in your working memory too. Now, I could do a whole talk just on that transcription side of the puzzle, but I'm not going to. What we're going to do in this talk is that we're going to talk about speaking and spelling at the word level. So where don't speaking and spelling overlap? Well, they don't overlap between accents and dialects. They don't overlap when spoken language changes. They don't overlap in connected speech. They don't overlap when there are signals within written words. They don't overlap in word families when we're talking about words that have something to do with one another orthographically, sometimes semantically, and so on. They don't overlap in homophones, and they don't overlap where etymology drives uncommon letter sequences. And that's a lot. That's a lot of places where speaking and spelling are different beasts. So with that information, and we'll unpack all of that as we go through the talk today, with that information, you've got some choices, and your choices are these. You can ignore this. You can embrace that it is in fact the case. You could even go as far to learn how to teach that it's the case and that it isn't scary, right? Or let's take it to another extreme. You could tell everyone else how non-scary it is and show them how you did it. Those are the choices, right? These are basically the things that we can do with this information, that speaking and spelling are different beasts. So let's say you chose A. Ignore the fact that speech and spelling are two different beasts. That will give a phonology heavy, orthography light approach to teaching reading. And if you choose that, it's still better than balanced literacy, right? It's still better than telling children to guess and to kind of bootstrap their own way to reading and writing. If you chose A, then some of your students will learn to read and write. They will. It's great. Some of your students will even still learn to read, but they won't improve their spelling. They won't reach their spelling potential. But some of your students won't even learn to read well, never mind spell well. And I'm concerned about all of those categories. I want everyone to reach their potential. Okay, so you chose B. Embrace the fact that speaking and spelling are two different beasts. That's great. The fact that you got here means I don't think there's that many people in the A category here. Maybe you're further on already, but the fact that you're here, well, it's mwah, I'm so glad, right? The fact that you're here listening to this is really, really good news. All right, so how about this was your attitude? B is for wimps. I choose C. Learn how to teach that it's the case and it isn't scary. And that's where we're going to begin today. And if you chose D, tell everyone how non-scary it is and show them how you did it. Well, welcome to my world. It's fun, isn't it? Back to this question. Where do they diverge? Where is speaking different from spelling? Well, let's talk about accents and dialects. I'm going to ask you some questions now, and I want you to say the words out loud to yourselves, to others, whoever you've got there with you, to your cat even. But I want you to say the answer to these questions out loud. Are you ready? Where does Nessie live? I'm talking about that monster, not the program for dyslexia, Nessie, which is wonderful in itself, but that monster, where does Nessie live? All right. It's here. Now, this is the spelling. And in my dialect, because I'm Scottish, I'll say Loch Ness. But you might have said Lach or Lach. I don't know. Depends on what you know about this word, right? But the speaking of that would vary. People say this in different ways. But I say Loch Ness. So that CH, because I'm Scottish and because I know this is a Scottish word, to me will be pronounced. My dad, right, is called Hugh Donaghy. So that's quite, there's some phonemes in those words, right? Hugh Donaghy, that a lot of people don't have in their system, in their consonant system. That then leads me to question this idea that you see everywhere. If you Google this question, how many phonemes in English, you'll get 44. Well, there's not 44. It depends on who's speaking, right? It depends on it, because I've got, right, as well. Anyway, where does Nessie live? So speaking and spelling are different. The spelling of Loch is always going to be the same, but the speaking is going to vary between dialects. Here's your next question. What is the opposite of rich? Did you think of the word? Here it is. Now, again, we've got people from all over the world watching this. In my accent, I say poor, right? So I'm Scottish again. You might say it in lots of different ways. I know there's people from Australia, and you know what they say? They go, poor, like that, which is lovely, right? But it's different from how you might say it, because if you're in America, you'll say something like poor, right? Sorry for my accent there. My accent says poor. All right, think of this word. You ready? If you move liquid into another container, what word? Did you think about it? In my accent, it's pour. Yep, pour. And that might be a homophone for poor, right? It's not in my accent. Here's the third one. Ready? A dog's foot is there. Did you think of it? Yeah, it's paw. Now, here's my accent again. I say poor, poor, paw. If you're from Australia, you're going to go like this. Paw, paw, paw. They're homophones in Australia. And there might be a couple of homophones there in an American accent as well. The spelling, however, is the same, right? You've got some possible homophones there, and they're distinguished from one another by different letter sequences. Speaking and the spelling are different things. When we acknowledge that, then what that does is it helps us to avoid this edict here. When said properly, it sounds like this. What do you mean properly? Who gets the label properly? Who gets the label proper speech? So many of us speak so differently. Try to avoid that. It's not about proper speech at all. Accents and dialects vary. So speaking and spelling are different beasts. Here's where they don't overlap as well. When spoken language changes. I'm going to look at two things here, two linguistic phenomena, if you like, called mergers and splits, right? A merger is where over time, in words where there were phonemes, two different phonemes, for instance, they've become one. I'll show you what I mean. That's a terrible explanation, but I'll demonstrate to you. What I want you to do, though, is think of a word that you use to ask the reason for something, and a separate word, a word that you use. They're both question words to ask about the time something happened. So the reason word is why, and the time word is when. Now, again, Scottish. So I haven't undergone that merger. W and you used to be, for everyone, separate phonemes. But over time, they've merged in many accents, in the majority of accents now. So it's why and when. In my accent, it's not. The speech and the spelling are different for me. So spoken language has merged. It's called the wine merger, has merged in many, many different accents. You could say, well, all right, well, I'm going to teach words that begin with WH by telling children that there's a different puff of air at the beginning. There isn't. If those children say why and when, there isn't. It's not, there's a proper way to say it or a non-lazy way to say it. In speech, lots of people have undergone that merger. You need to be aware of the fact that there's a merger now. I'll show you another example of that merger. Oh, I gave you the answer. I hate that. A soft voice. When I do this, what am I doing? And an implement to froth liquids. Well, that's whisper and whisk. The WH there in these words indicates that we have a word that was born from onomatopoeia, right? From the passage of air like that, right? That WH indicates, is a marker, gives us this etymological information, even if you say whisper and whisk now, which the majority of English speakers do. That's a merger. It's merged over time. Not for everyone. That's the other thing. Remember accent and dialect, right? All right, some more words. Ready? What's that thing on the end of your leg that you stand on? Yeah, this is another merger. And the male of this is a gander. So the thing on the end of your leg, what's that word? And the male is a gander. You got the two words? They're foot and goose, right? For me, I've had that merger. Ooh, ooh, yep. Some people in Australia, for instance, will say foot, goose, right? Oh, ooh. They haven't had that merger. That merger hasn't happened in that accent. Here's another one. What is the opposite of push? And where do you go swimming? In a... For me, they're homophones. Pool, pool, right? In other accents, they're not homophones. So I've had that merger happen in my accent. You might not have. You might say pull, pool, right? They're different. Spoken language changes. And it changes within accents and dialects Sometimes it changes for the whole population, but it changes because spoken language is done much, much more. We speak a lot more than we write, and therefore spoken language is subject to change over time at a much higher rate than written language is. There's also this idea of splits in language as well. Think of these two words: an unadulterated substance, right? Something that is just that and nothing else. And then that word again, not rich. What words am I thinking of? Pure and poor, right? They've split. They used to, in most accents, rhyme, but they've split. There's a distinction now. Yep. Pure, poor. But some people will say pure, poor. Yeah, split. They've split over time. So spoken language changes. It's subject to different pressures and forces. The good news is that the spelling very rarely changes. So we've got this stability in spelling. And if we're careful about teaching children that they are different things and that one varies, is quite subject to quite a lot of variance, and the other one is quite stable, then I think we're building a foundation that's going to be more reliable for everybody who's learning to read and write. Where else are they different beasts? Well, in connected speech. So when we speak, we don't speak in individual speech sounds with a little space in between them, right? Our speech sounds combine to form words, and our words combine to form phrases, and our phrases combine to form sentences, utterances, yeah, whatever. They're not the same as isolated phonemes and isolated words. We have this phenomenon called co-articulation. Say this. T. Now say this. R. All right. So in not in connected speech, t and r have very distinct gestures, right? Speech gestures, t and r. But if you combine them in a word like the word for a locomotive on rails, what word am I thinking? Yeah, it's train. Do you really go train or do you go train? And again, avoid this if it's said correctly. We're talking about speech here. There is no correct speech. There's a scale of how formal and informal you are. But if you're teaching children to build a robust lexicon, you can't just say, well, it's the sounds in the word as you say it, because most children, if that's all they've got to go on, will spell train CHRAIN. It's called co-articulation. When they're together, they smoosh into one another, right? To put it in a very non-technical way. Segments fit closely together in speech, and they'll co-articulate. They'll start to work with one another. And that's why train is train in lots and lots of people's speech. How about this one? Say say p, say n. There, you've got some beautiful speech sounds there. P, n. But what's that pie that you eat at Thanksgiving? Did you say it? It's pumpkin pie. Now, did you say pumpkin pie? Did you? I don't think so. That's not how we say it. If you want children to write that and you say, just say it like it sounds, they're going to write all sorts of strange things, right? Pumpkin pie. That's co-articulation. You're getting ready for the next speech segment. So speech and spelling are different things. Train is always going to look like that. Pumpkin pie is always going to look like that, but they're going to be said differently. Then there's also elision. We get this a lot. We get this a lot where we miss out whole segments in a word when we put words together. And sometimes when we put phonemes together, sometimes we'll sort of skip over some of the speech sounds, even though the spelling will show each one of those segments. I want you to think about this other month of the year called Jamember. Actually, what it is how we normally say when we're talking to one another, do you remember? Jamember. Yep. I looked for elision and co-articulation examples on Twitter recently this week to prepare for this talk, and somebody posted this picture of This guy apparently who is hilarious. He talks about Jamember and Jafta. Do you have to? And so on. We do this all the time. They're different things. Speech and spelling, different things. The spelling will go the long way round. Yeah, the speech often clips, elides, co-articulates. Where else? Where else are they different beasts? Well, let's have a look. Where there are signals. In spelling, in written language, in English, what we have to do is take 26 letters and we have to combine them and recombine them to express all of the hundreds of thousands of words that are in the English lexicon. We don't use things like umlauts, you know, those two dots that go above letters in some languages. We don't use those. We don't use circumflexes, which is that pointy diacritic. French does, it uses circumflexes, rêve, you know, to dream. There's an E with a circumflex over it, or cedillas, you know, to show softening, like a little 5 without a top on it underneath a C in French, for instance. We don't use any of those. What we do to signal pronunciation, and not just pronunciation, but to signal historical kinships, morphological and etymological kinships, we use signals. We recombine letters to use signals. One of the most common signals is final silent E. E on the end of a word doesn't make a sound, right, in English. So when you have E at the end of a word, you know that you're not going to say or E, right? It's something else. It's a signal. It's signaling something. What is it signaling in these words? If we take pin and then we add final silent E, the pronunciation is still, and it still ends with an N sound, doesn't it? So the E is not a pronunciation signal for anything that should be associated with the letter E. What it is instead is that it takes this letter sequence and it creates a new word by signaling that there is a vowel name preceding it. So pin becomes pine. It's not like IE is a unit that was split by the N. That's called the split digraph fallacy, and it's not true. What we've done here is we've recombined, because that's what we do. We signal things. What's the signal that final silent E is giving us in the word lapse? I'd like to see your theories. Oh, and to figure out what the signal is, you might want to take it away and see what you've got. Let me look at the chat. Ooh, lots of people. Yay, look at that. Look at that. That's great. Yeah. So if we took away the E, let's just cover that E for a second. So I'll take it away. Covering that E, we've now got the word LAPS, lapse, as in I ran laps for fitness, right? But if I put an E on the end of there, I'm signaling that I'm not talking about the plural noun lapse anymore. I'm talking about the verb lapse. I let my membership lapse. Some would call it plural cancelling E. That's one of the things. That's one of the things that E does. It's one of the signals. This is not a plural, right? What about rage? What's E doing there? Wow, great answers here. What's the E doing in rage? If we took it away, yeah. Yep. Good stuff. Now, there's some great answers here. If I took away the E though, and it was only signaling something about the G, that word would be rag, but it's not, is it? What is that word without the E? I'm trying to cover the E. What is that word without the E? It's the word rag. There's two changes there, two signals, right? The E is signaling that the preceding A is saying its name, and it's also signaling that the G is making the sound J as opposed to G, which it normally represents. Without a signal, that G will say G, but the signal is the E here. So speaking and spelling, again, different things. They don't overlap where there are signals. The signal will often tell you about the speaking, but in a word like lapse, and lapse It doesn't tell you about the sound of the word. It tells you something else. Signals are not just for sounds. Very good. Thank you very much. All right. What else? What are other signals? Well, let's have a look at the word to. And this comes up a lot these days, and I'm really happy to see it. I learned about that many, many years ago. I think when I did my Spalding training was the first time that somebody showed me that TW, and this was Spalding, actually indicates the meaning to. It indicates this concept of to. And then they showed me all the other words where TW is that have something to do with to. Mind blowing. I didn't know that. I had no idea. Prior to that, I didn't even think about it, but I had definitely seen people saying, oh, well, that W isn't English crazy. Look at that. Whoa, crazy old W. Actually, we say the W in most of these words. And other words in other languages for the number two, like in Dutch, twee, in German, zwei, in Polish, dwa, that W, that second sound there after the T or after the D is very, very audible, right? It's only in the number two that we don't say that W, but everywhere else we do. Now, that's a signal again. That signal is saying we have a connection here. We have a family. Let's look at the word people. What's that O doing there? Well, again, it's a signal. What it's telling us is that this word is connected to population. So when they go back to their roots, if you like, we've got a family there. We've got connections. We've got kinships. This is a good thing to know. It's not that EO is a spelling for the sound E. That's a lot. That's a lot of information, a lot of code to learn for words where, well, for a very, very few words in English. Wouldn't it be better to say, well, actually, it's a signal that connects it to its family, to its kin? How about sign? You see this all the time, right? This word sign. Is GN a spelling for the sound N? Is that how we want to teach it? Is that a piece of code now? When you hear an N, it could be GN, or is it a signal to show the relationship between signature, signal itself, and so on? The G resurfaces, that G sound resurfaces in that family. Or could, what the heck is that L doing there? Well, what it does is it ties could to would and should, which are tied to will and shall. That L is unetymological in that it was inserted to provide that signal. And we can do that as well. But speaking, spelling, different things in different systems. Even the word debt, what's that B doing there? Well, it helps us to connect to the word debit. When somebody debits your account, which I don't wish on anybody, right? You may go into debt. That B signals that relationship. I love this one as well. We've got, we'll start with this. We'll start with the words guard and guarantee and gorilla. And then this word in French, guesp, right? Now, guard, guarantee, gorilla, the GU there is a signal as well. It's an etymological signal. And we have words that came from the same place that we spell with a W. GU and W are linked together etymologically. Look at guard and ward. Yep. Guarantee and warranty. Can you see the connection between the GU and the W? Gorilla and war. What do you reckon the word guesp is in French? Because that signaling, that kinship goes two ways. What do you reckon guesp is? If GU is W, did you guess? Yeah, so wasp. Yay, thank you, Alicia. Yeah, absolutely right. These are signals. It's not that necessarily GU is a spelling for the sound G now, and you've got to learn that as well. Why not show this connection? Children dig it. They understand it. Where else? Well, we looked at some word families back there. And speaking and spelling differ in the families that they belong to. A lot of the time I see spelling lists. I go into schools and I see spelling lists. I see lists of words that children have got to somehow remember with the theory that it will make them fluent readers, right? And it's a fairly noble theory. We definitely want children to be able to instantly recognize high frequency words. And if those high frequency words are irregular words, then it's harder for them to sound it out. So some of our approaches can be, well, what we're going to do then is we're going to segment every written word into a spoken sound. And you're going to learn that as a code, the complex code, if you like. We run into problems with that really, really fast. Think of this. What is the first number when we count? Be amazing if I could advance my slides. The first number is the number 1. That actually bears a relationship towards like only and alone. If you teach them to, thank you, if you teach them together, right? One, only, and alone, you don't have to put that word, that written word, into some sort of speech sound mapper and go, well, I think the O is the W part. Like, they're different things. They're different things. Even the number 2, different things. The speaking and the spelling are different. So this is a good word family. One, only, and alone, rather than if you're grouping words by sound, you could say one is part of the family wonder and water and will, right? Because they all begin with a whoop sound. That's not a great family. That's not a great family. This is a much better family. All right, think of the next word. Ready? Think of the infinitive form of the word said, because I survey teachers. Wherever I go, I get them to write down or tell me the words that they find most difficult for their students to acquire, especially the lower primary students. And said comes up over and over and over again. So therefore, we have some approaches in a completely speech oriented, phonology heavy approach. We could say, well, AI is a spelling for the sound eh. So you need to learn that. So here's a piece of code now that you've also got to put in that store of units that you need to pull from your memory if you want to spell this word. Or you could say, in this family, we've got pay, lay, and say. They're all in the same family because when we put them into the past tense, they become paid, laid, and said. And even the word said, the speaking and the spelling are different, right? It should say said. And in some accents of English, it still is. My grandparents said said. There's lots of people in Scotland that said said. I'd say there's a bunch of people in America that say said. The speaking and the spelling are not different for them. But again, variation across accents and dialects shows how different those beasts are. The spelling will always go like this. The speaking may vary, right? Teach them as a word family. That's a much better word family. And how about this one, the letter O? Gosh, there's so many arguments I see about the letter O. The letter O, usually the sound, the default phoneme for that grapheme is O. It can also say its name O, like in the word open. Yeah. It can also say, it can say O and O. And actually, if you're teaching vowels as sound name distinctions at first, that's a pretty good phonics approach, I reckon. A, e, o, a, e, I, o, u. Right? They're really good. But the letter O often says something other than its sound or name. And in some very, very high frequency words like to and do and who. Your choice then is to say, all right, well, the letter O can also make an oo sound. And I know Spalding does this as well. And that's a print to speech program, right? Or you could say, this is the family where the letter O, yep, is saying oo, to, do, and who. There are other words in that family. This is never an exhaustive list. But high frequency, to, do, and who, really good to learn in a family because the speaking and the spelling are different. They're different beasts. Also, we've got where O makes an sound. Come, love, honey, and other. There's a specific reason for that. And you can go into that reason if you like. But what children are going to remember, and word stories and etymology, really, really good knowledge for teachers to have. How much instructional time you spend on that really is up to you, right? But it's good that it's a good idea for you to know the stories, why the speaking and spelling are different. Come, love, honey, and other. Within those, if you say head words in that family, you can list lots of other words where the O is making an sound, and you can start to see the pattern. I'm not going to tell you the pattern. You figure out the pattern, right? You don't already know it. You probably already know it because you're here, right? Right? All right. So word families are great for grouping words together that are not to do with how the words sound, but to do with the letter sequences. All right. Here's the other one, homophones, right? We have lots and lots and lots of words in English, and some of them sound exactly the same, even though historically they've got nothing to do with one another, right? They come from different roots. They come from different languages. They come from different ways of expressing ourselves, but they sound the same. So what do we do with that? Well, what orthography does, even though the sound, the phonology might be the same, the orthography tries to distinguish between words that sound the same wherever possible, so that when we're reading, when we're looking at the printed words, we know straight away which word that meant. Some would call it the homophone principle. I quite like that. It's a fairly elegant way to talk about it. I talk about homophones as well, and how teaching them at the same time as one another, you know, like there, and there, and you're can often be confusing. It's a really, really good idea to separate them out. But let's do some homophone work. I want to do some homophone work with jokes. Are you ready? You ready? What happens when an omega-3 bottle lands on your head? And it's only a little bottle. It's very light. It's not very heavy. So when it falls out of the cupboard and lands on your head, what happens? You get superficial injuries. Yeah. So even in that phrase, we've got enough homophony to make a really fabulous joke there. And when I say fabulous, I really am expressing my opinion now. There's no research on how fabulous this is. Okay, here's the next one. Why does the baker do his job? Because he needs the dough, right? Homophones. Homophones actually help us to make jokes. We've got this really rich language. And sometimes words will sound the same, which gives us lots of opportunities for humor. How about this one? How do you measure the quality of my jokes? With a seismograph. Right? Homophones, they're fabulous, but they do illustrate that we have two different beasts here, speaking and spelling. All right. Where else don't they overlap? And I can see the chat, and I will respond to some of the questions. There's a conversation going on though. Thank you, Deirdre. It's a conversation about a word list book. Can I address that later so that you can concentrate on this? That would be really good. All right. Thanks. Okay, so where else don't speech and spelling overlap? Where else are they different beasts? Well, when etymology drives uncommon sequences. So you ready to think of these words? Here we go. What is the word that we use to express the day that's in the middle of the week? I like the German version. You know what the German version of this word is? Mittwoch, right? Middle week. They don't muck about. But we, in the middle of the week, that middle of the week word is, what is it? Wednesday, right? The speaking and the spelling of that are way off. They diverged a long time ago. The days of the week in English are based on things that are in the sky, like the sun, the moon, and Saturn, and Germanic gods. So Wednesday was Odin's day. Odin was kind of the head of all of that. If you've watched any of the Marvel universe, then the students that you're working with will definitely know who Odin is. In over time, that became Woden's day, and then Wednesday, Wednesday. When we spell it, a lot of the time we will say Wednesday. I've seen approaches to phonics where the DNE, this section here, DNE, is lumped together and put on a chart as a possible spelling for the sound N. This is where it gets really tricky. This is where I start to draw the line, right? If you're saying that this letter sequence, that every letter sequence must be there for a sound, that's not true. DNE is not a spelling for the sound N, right? And you see this all the time. It's Woden's day, Wednesday. Practice it like that. Using a spelling voice is a great idea. Here's the next word. You ready? There was all sorts of controversy around Princess Kate, right? She disappeared for a while. Now we have the very sad news that she's receiving treatment for cancer. Some of the conspiracy theories went along the lines of, oh, William is interested in someone else. And that someone else was called the Marchioness of, do you remember who this was? This was and it's not true. Well, I don't know what's true, but it was all speculation. But that he was now interested in the Marchioness of, what was that word? If you've been following this royal saga. Well, this is the word here. That's it. That's the spelling. Those are the letter sequences. And if you haven't heard of this word, you might say Cholmondeley. Guess how the English say it? She's the Marchioness of Cholmondeley. Right? The speaking and the spelling of two different beasts. They've gone completely differently. Marchioness of Cholmondeley. Or what kind of sauce do you like in your Bloody Mary? If you had never seen the spelling of it, you might spell it Wooster, right? But it's Worcester. When we borrow words, a lot of the time, when we write them, we'll preserve the letter sequences, but when we say them, especially over time, they will kind of anglicize, or they will become a little bit more like the phonology of English. We've got words from, we have loan words from many, many different languages, like this one, restaurant, or aardvark, or schadenfreude, or psychology, or karaoke, one of my favorite words in the whole world, or safari. If you look at all of those letter sequences, are we really going to segment them and say, this is now a spelling for the sound blah? That's a lot. Even this word, what do you call a nosy pepper? A white, oh wait, screwed up that joke. We'll do it again. Why is the pepper why is this pepper nosy? Because it's jalapeno business. Oh, such a bad joke. Jalapeno business. Terrible. Anyway, there are lots and lots of examples where the speaking and the spelling are two different things, and many, because etymology is driving these uncommon sequences. Our choices are to teach those sequences as spelling for sounds, or to acknowledge that we borrow lots of words, and words change over time. Wednesday, Cholmondeley, Worcester. All right. By the way, everything that I'm saying here isn't a new idea. This isn't a new idea, right? Here's my dog modeling one of my favorite books, The American Way of Spelling by Richard Benesky. If you don't have this book and you're interested in the things that I'm saying here, I would get it. It's a really, really good guide, and it's something that has guided me for many, many years. The part that I'm really interested in terms of this talk is what Benesky says about English orthography. If we posit that speaking and spelling are reversible processes, then what we have there is a failed phonetic transcription system, right? All of the words that I've shown you today show that there isn't a one-to-one match. So Benesky says English orthography is not a failed phonetic transcription system invented out of madness or perversity. And how often do you see on social media, for instance, people throwing up their hands and going, oh, English is crazy. No, it's not. It's actually quite an elegant system, but it's a complex system. Instead, it's a more complex system that preserves bits of history, right? Cholmondeley, Wednesday, so on. It facilitates understanding. So it gives us differences between homophones, right? As one example, and also translates to sound. Have you noticed that also translates into sound is the last thing that Benesky says spelling does? In Benesky's inventory, there are 37 single consonant units. These are graphemes, right? For sounds, spellings for sounds, if you like. Benesky posits 24 major vowel patterns, and he also talks about minor patterns and units, but even those don't constitute the 200 plus false graphemes that are in circulation. If you look on something like Teachers Pay Teachers or Twinkle or so on, you'll find these charts that have, well, this one's got over 180 pieces of code for the sounds that are commonly said in English. That's a lot of code. I can guarantee you that a large amount of children won't be able to memorize all of that, or select it randomly, or select it correctly when they're trying to spell. So who is saying that speaking and spelling are the same beast? am I making this up, or is this something that isn't true and that people aren't saying it? Well, actually, to prepare this talk, I did a very quick look on, I had a few terms that I Googled and looked into my materials for. One of the terms were speaking and spelling are reversible. One of them was there are this many graphemes for the spoken sounds. One of them was how many spoken sounds are there in English? None of these are particularly precise, but lots and lots of people are saying speaking and spelling are the same beast. For instance, phonic books. Decoding is the reverse of encoding. I think from what we've just done today, I hope to show you that that's not actually true. It happens at the very lower levels or the very beginning levels of reading and writing. That's the alphabet where they overlap, where I showed you at the very beginning, but they're not the reverse of one another. They're different things. If you say they're the reverse, then what you're saying is that they're the same beast, and they're not. That can cause problems, and I'll show you the results of some of the problems that faulty foundation causes. The Reading Reform Foundation talks about children are taught spelling as the reverse of reading. Unfortunately, it's not a good thing to teach children because it's not actually true, and it breaks down really quickly. It's fine for your regular CVC words, but the moment that you get into more complex words, and we're talking about words like of and the, right? Not very complex. That breaks down. Phonics Hero. I looked at that. That came up on my Google search, and it said something like the process of spelling is reverse to reading. This message is being repeated over and over again in education circles, and I think it's a good idea to challenge it. Even big programs like EBLI say things like spelling is a code and every code is reversible. Not necessarily. Speaking and spelling are two different beasts. Phonographics. In the phonographics material, they talk about basic code for 42 sounds. You know, and the code is reversible. That's if you're teaching English orthography as one giant code. However, that's not what's happening in English words. That's not how the system is built. Even the program based on phonographics, Sounds Right, says things like, in fact, there are fewer than 200, meaning approaching 200 common regular spellings of sounds in English. 200 units that people have learned, approaching 200. That's a lot. That's a lot of code for children to somehow store and draw on when they're working independently. So why does it matter? What does it matter making the distinction between speaking and spelling? Well, in my view, a phonology-heavy, orthography-light approach leads to phonetic spelling. And we want more than phonetic spelling for all our learners, especially the vulnerable ones, the ones that we see at Lifelong Literacy, and I dare say that you see all over the world. I'll show you some examples of phonetic spelling. These are the first spelling tests that children do when they come to see us. This is the word elect. Elect. Yeah, that's the word elect. Phonetic spelling. Fix. Then we've got a child who was told that double L is a spelling for the sound ul, so old child. Learning code and applying it willy-nilly. Look at GLAD, 2 L's. It's a problem. 6, SICS. This one, push, third, few, wire, raise, request, truly, cities. This is phonology heavy, orthography light. This is the result of that. And a much younger child as well, we've got book. The letter O was taught to them as a spelling for the sound U, right? Or U in this accent. And so book, well, I'm going to do the most energy efficient way of writing the sound U. I'm going to put a single O. Phonology heavy, orthography light. Play, lay, and so on. We want more than that. We want more than that for all our learners. And I'm not just talking about children who are dyslexic or who have intellectual disabilities or who, find for whatever reason difficulty in building a robust mental orthographic lexicon. I'm talking about all children. This is a spelling test that I did when I was about 10 or 11. And I'm a good speller. It didn't take me long to spell words correctly, and I didn't have to have a lot of exposures. But even then, and I was taught in this school particularly, I went to lots of different primary schools, but this school particularly, there was no etymological instruction, there was no morphological instruction. As you can see, it's the etymology and the morphemes that are letting me down. Subterranean, apparatus, portmanteau, miscellaneous, and amateur. I didn't have the spellings for. I could have got 100 out of 100, perhaps. What I'm saying is, and this again in reading science circles is something of a catch cry about teaching the alphabetic code as being harmful for none, crucial for some. It's the same with morphological and etymological instruction. It's the same for saying speaking and spelling, two different beasts, crucial for some, harmful for none. All right. Why else does it matter? Well, here's the thing about spelling development. It requires explicit instruction in all the layers of the writing system. So let's look at those layers again. One sound for one letter, a brilliant starting point. And any systematic synthetic phonics program worth its salt will begin there, and it will do that systematically. Even the ones where the authors and I don't see eye to eye. Then we've got additional common sounds, like the letter A also can express the sound A. The letter C, K, S, and so on. Letter combinations, we should teach that. Our basic digraphs and our basic trigraphs. There's no such thing as a quadgraph. Once you get a letter sequence that looks like 4 letters together and one sound, orthography, etymology, morphology needs to come into it. So looking at where words come from, there are lots and lots of wonderful books and resources for children on etymology. If you tell children that words have stories and they have families, which is what etymology gives us, then children dig it and understand it, and you can form some really good foundations. Same with orthographic expectancies, what you would expect from this letter sequence, or if you are trying to express a certain sound or a certain kinship, you would expect this letter sequence. It's a good thing to know. And those are the spelling rules of English. Rules. This is a system. It's based on rules. Without rules, there's chaos. And I see the chaos in the minds and the output of the children that I work with all the time. We also have uncommon spellings, like Wednesday, Chumley, Worcester, and so on. And morphology, and everyone's getting into morphology right at the moment, which is absolutely great. I'm glad. I welcome it, embrace it. At the basis of all of this is the understanding, and this is the alphabetic principle, the understanding that print can represent speech. Of course it can. That's what we've based an alphabetic system on. But in English, it's not a one-to-one match. We have a complex orthography, not a simple one, right? I always get the word opaque wrong. For me, it still connects to see-through, and it's not opaque. We have an opaque orthography. It's not a one-to-one match. The overlap is a fabulous starting point. That's where systematic synthetic phonics wins over all other approaches that I've seen. It can't be the endpoint, though. Why teach part of the system when you can teach it all? So start. My advice is start. What I would advise here, if you want to get into this further and you want to move away from saying that speech and spelling are reversible processes, then learn how to teach reading and spelling with the idea that they're different systems. And you can do that right from the start with our high frequency so-called irregular words. Start by choosing some words that you're comfortable with, like was. It's a really good one. It's a really good one to teach, to show what's going on underneath the bonnet of this system. Also, though, choose some words that you're curious about. That's a great starting point too, because nobody carries all of this in their heads, right? There are places that you can look to see morphological, etymological kinships, unusual letter sequences, and orthography. Choose some words that you're curious about and explore them with your students. But most of all, enjoy it. It's highly enjoyable for student and teacher alike. I'm going to stop sharing with you now, and I know that there are some questions that may need addressing. Lynn, did you want to say anything, or would you like me to go through the questions?
I mean, at first, just want to say thank you so much. That was fantastic and fascinating. I know you did have a couple of questions just asking for book references. I know you saw those. Is there anything you want to share?
Let's have a look. Oh, yeah, there's a few things I want to share, actually. So there's the Vinesky book. If you don't have the Vinesky book, I would get it. It's again, stood the test of time, and also shows that this idea of speaking and spelling being two different beasts, it's not a new idea. It's not new. We've been thinking about this for a long, 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 long time. We've just been kind of overwhelmed with let's just concentrate on sounds. And I understand that, because again, from a balanced literacy point of view, sounds were not important, right? So we've sort of had this overcompensation by going sounds, and great, but let's bring it back to what's happening in the language. All right, now, hello from Sydney. I'm just going down here. Can you clarify, are you using encoding and decoding as a synonym for speaking and spelling? No, definitely not. In fact, spelling, if you look back at that diagram that I had before, where have I gone? Different layers of the system. I'll just share it with you again. I wrote this diagram to help me think about all of that, because when you're at the one letter, one sound, additional common sounds and letter combinations, you know, at the first couple of years in a phonics program, yeah, we're talking about encoding. We're talking about hearing a sound and writing down graphemes that match that sound. It's a great exercise. That's encoding. But this bit here, this is spelling. This is applying those other layers in higher and higher complexity to more and more words, and being able to transfer that to unfamiliar words as well. That's what I mean by encoding and decoding. They're not synonyms for speaking and spelling. I hope that addresses your question. Lynn says, encoding and decoding are terms for spelling and reading unknown words. Yeah, kind of. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Lynn.
No, not at all.
You didn't want to elaborate on that?
Oh, no, I was just trying to explain for the person who asked the question that decoding was about reading and
decoding. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, we're talking about expressive and receptive language, which is, you know, also one of the reasons why they're two different beasts. But there's this trend now that I see in education circles where people are using the word encoding as a synonym for spelling. And that's a problem, because what that does is that further pushes this idea that speaking and spelling are reversible processes, or are they the same beast? That's why we get questions on social media like, how do I code this word? When actually it's not about attaching or shoehorning graphemes into phonemes in most of you know, the words that they ask questions about. So that's where encoding is dangerous.
Yeah, I've always been taught that encoding is spelling, so that's good to have the clarification. Thank you.
Different layers. If in a transparent orthography, encoding is spelling, but not in English, right? Not in English, as far or the use of that term encoding. How do I code this sound? That's, you know, or how, you know, how do I take this word and attach speech sounds to it? Look at the word one. How are you going to do that? You're not. Right? That would be such a loss of richness if you don't put it into a word family, like one, alone, lonely, only, and so on. Alicia says, that's why I always say there's an imperfect relationship between speech and print. Absolutely. And it is predictable. Jennifer, we like to use accepted rather than the right or correct, proper. Yeah, even accepted, though, is regional. It's regional, and it's also on a scale of formal to informal. And yes, I get there's a standard accent in regions too. So getting that word right is definitely difficult. I'm absolutely with you on that, Jennifer. But by golly, again, when you're looking at some of the things that on social media, not you folks, right? But you live in communities where there is still this idea that there's a correct way to say something. No, there isn't. There isn't. There's formal and informal, and then there's your accent and your dialect. Who gets the label correct? Emily, hello, Emily. Lovely to see you. I saw Emily in Hawaii in January, was it? So lovely. Oh, correction. Yes, actually, the Foot Goose was originally the same vowel sound. Well, it still is for me. Then they split, and now some are merging back. Yep, cool. Thank you. Rachel, there is a whistle when I articulate these sounds in a word. Yes, what you articulate is not necessarily what the students that you're working with articulate or what everyone else articulates, because speaking and spelling are two different things. So however you say it, right, is not as relevant as or stable as how it's written, which is one thing, and how it's said, which is lots of different things in different populations. All right. Cool.
Can help you scan down for questions. I know there was one.
Jennifer said, I find that all of these issues that come from a focus on speech can be avoided by putting the primary focus on meaning. Yep, but not the primary focus on meaning like balanced literacy does. Ah, gosh, no, we don't mean that. We don't mean that. And I know you don't mean that either, Jennifer, especially since English prioritizes consistent spelling of morphemes over consistent spelling of phonemes. Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't say it better. Beautifully said. And I love the way that that principle, that idea is coming into education with joy. People are really enjoying this distinction. Alicia says, what about the AI in again? What about it? You know, some people say again. The speaking and the spelling, right? The spelling is consistent. The speaking isn't. So if we're going to say that AI is a spelling for the sound well, only for some people, it's not a good family to have. It's a sound-based family rather than, you know, an etymology, morphology, syntax-based family like say, said, pay, paid, and so on. And Emily says, pays, lays. Yeah, there's a sound change in say to say, says. Some people still say says, though. So again, accent dialect dependent. Sarah says, is there a book you recommend as a resource for these etymological and meaning markers connections? Yes, there's tons, right? Lots of really good ones. And I think this is where that beautiful conversation arose. So I want to address all of that. The Vanesky book, definitely, I would have that. Why wouldn't you have that in your library? Definitely get that book. Also, Beneath the Surface of Words. Oh, what a good book that is. And then Back Pocket Words by Gail Venable. And Lynn, I reckon you're probably going to put some links in the notes, right? So I'll put those forward soon.
Yeah.
Lots that you can do. I wanted also to talk about homophones visualized. So I have this on the desk to show that. I love that. Teaching homophones together isn't a good idea, but what a good resource this is to show the difference. I love this one. Bear and bear. Isn't that cool? Right, so there's lots and lots of pictures. That doesn't mean that you've got to learn homophones through pictures or anything like that, but it's, again, another resource that helps us to show speaking and spelling, different beasts, homophone principle, and so on. Miss Lizzie says, thoughts about a scope and sequence to use in word inquiry past the initial code. Well, I know that the actual, I don't know what to call it, like the movement structured word inquiry doesn't particularly issue scopes and sequences or word lists and that sort of thing. But there are others who work with this that do look at the scope and sequence of what words you are going to be inquiring in. However, per my advice at the end of this presentation, if you want to start, then start with a word you're comfortable with and start with words that you're curious about. That's a good scope and sequence. Also, you've got your high frequency irregular word lists, right? They're everywhere. You might want to start with those too. That's a really good word list to follow, but never ever look at words without looking at their kinships. What else is in that family? Like the word was, right? Or was, or however you say it in speech, because by the way, in connected speech, that's often was, right? Yeah, look at that. But it's connected to want and wash and wasp and wand. And what's that? What have they got in common? There's your word inquiry. What is it about them? Well, it's the W before the A. Happens in some words. Jennifer says, beneath the surface of words. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely brilliant. Beautiful book. Thank you, Alicia. I love her book, Spelling for Life, plus those by Arika Okrent, Diana Hambury-King, and David Crystal. Yeah, David Crystal I've got, Spell It Out. Great book. That's really influenced me as well. Yeah. Oh, how do you say that? Chitterlings. Is it, how do you say it? I don't know. I don't know. I've only ever read that word. That's the other thing. Sometimes you've only ever read a word and you think it's pronounced a certain way and it's not. I came across one recently, hegemony. I thought it was hegemony, right? I'd never heard anyone say hegemony before. I thought it was hegemony. Apparently it's not. It's hegemony. So speaking, sometimes you've got a pronunciation for a word in your head that's different from the speech because they're different things, right? So I've applied letter sound rules to that and, emphasis and so on, and I've come up with hegemony. Oops. Get that all the time. So I'd say chitterlings, but I know that's not how you say it. Something else. A word list book, does this exist? Oh, I see. Yeah, I've written a list of handy bases that's coming out in a book called Language for Life in August. So I've got one. Joe says, in my phonographics training, they never pushed it as reversible and encouraged heaps of morphology. Yeah, I know, but when I was showing you those who's saying that it's reversible, I showed you a paragraph from the phonographics material saying that it was reversible. So yeah, they do, right? Whether or not with your phonographics training, they'll also say that morphology is important. That's great. I love that. But having that idea that these are reversible is a problem. It's a foundation that's a little bit shaky. It's a foundation built on sand rather than concrete. And thank you. Great. Etymology online, absolutely. The online etymology dictionary, a great source. It won't break words down into morphemes for you, right? That's not its purpose, but it will tell you word history, and it's a work in progress because none of us carry this in our heads, right? All right. Do you have any book titles for children on etymology, says Sarah? I'm so glad you asked. Yes, I do. Actually, I should have brought them over. First of all, we've got Why is a Tiger a Tiger? That's a great beginning text for children on etymology. It just, just takes animals and it shows why they got their names, which is rather super because everyone loves animals, right? And then we've got Once Upon a Word. Where is that? Oh, it's over here somewhere. Anyway, there's a book called Once Upon a Word, and that's a really good common word etymology study for children. Oh, I'm trying to find it. And this, I got this fairly recently. So that's the Oxford School Dictionary of Word Origins. Lovely to have on hand too. I saw Once Upon a Word just recently.
I just put it in the chat, the link.
Thanks. All right. You're all very, very, very kind. Venesky, it's VENEZKY. Because you know
That's
what?
in the chat too. I put the book, I found the link for that one. It's in there.
Wait, Sarah, were you showing me the difference between speaking and spelling by writing Venesky like that? Hope so. Deirdre O'Toole, my very, very best Irish friend, says there's a gorgeous book for kids by Tom Reed Wilson called Every Word Tells a Story that explores the origin of various interesting but common words. A lovely way to introduce etymology. Ooh, well, I'll have to get that now, won't I? And she's put a link in the chat to that. Joe says, the book I used a lot in the last 20 years is English Isn't Crazy by Diana Hanbury King. I love that title. What a great title. English isn't crazy. It's not. It's a really elegant system. Thanks for clarifying. As the consistency is in understanding for the group is important, the terms are used differently. Yep, I got it. All right. Would you still support the use of Elkonin boxes? Absolutely. What a great framework for phoneme grapheme representations in words that aren't complex. Of course, of course. Yes, Elkonin boxes are great. I'm not saying throw phonics out. Don't do that. Don't do that. But move along as well. And if you can, combine your phonics with your other layers as well, especially in those high frequency words at the beginning. Yeah, Elkonin boxes are awesome. Not boxes around words though. Word coffins. That's, oh gosh, that's then. Yeah, I can see lots of grimacing. Sarah says, at what age would you start teaching this? Well, I would go from the age that you want children to be able to reproduce and recognize high frequency irregular words. So whatever age that is within your judgment, I would do it then. children are budding linguists, and they, to learn your language, to learn your native language or languages, you've got this brain growth that's happening from birth all the way up really through 8 or 9 years old that is exponential. It makes children, one of the things that we are genetically programmed to do is to learn language. Children are curious about language. It's not that novices are, not curious. It's not that novices can't learn. So when would you start teaching this? As soon as possible, I would say. However, that's not to say that you throw phonics out. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. But you can combine a little bit more by saying things like speaking and spelling are different things, right? Rather than speaking and spelling are reversible in English.
I think we have time for one more question, if that's okay, Lynn.
Sorry, yeah.
How to respond to the statement that speech to print approaches get kids reading actual books sooner?
Well, yes, I mean, I understand that any phonics approach, not just speech to print, but any approach that will teach one sound for one letter, additional common sounds and combinations of letters to produce speech sounds in English, any approach that's systematically put forward into children's minds in classrooms is going to get children reading sooner. Great, do that. That's wonderful. But if that's all you got, right, that's a problem. That's what I'm saying. There's more to it, and it's more joyful for you as a teacher and more productive for students if we don't just turn them into phonetic spellers, if we can separate out these two different beasts, show where they overlap and show where they don't overlap. It's not scary. And once you start doing it, my advice is tell everybody else about it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to include a list of the books that Lynn mentioned and get any resources from her to add when I share out the recording. I just want to speak for everyone on the call and everyone watching the recording saying what a joy it is to hear you speak. Thank you so much. I learned so much from listening to you, and I'd say that I was named after you, but I think we're the same age or so. I may be older than you, so I can't.
You're so not older than me.
You're very close, I think. But I'm going to go around telling people that or something to that effect. But it's always so wonderful to hear you speak. Somebody, I know one of the comments was that we need a whole day of this. I couldn't agree more. Maybe we'll get to do a series with Lynn next school year or something. That would be amazing.
Well, look, I'm coming to America in October, and I'd be happy to do a New York-based workshop.
Would you?
Yeah,
oh
absolutely.
my God, that would be amazing. I will email you about this in about 5 minutes.
Watch this space.
Well, that would be fantastic. We would love to have you. Well, I'll say good night or good morning or good afternoon because it's so cool. This is, I mean, we've hosted, Reading League New York has hosted a number of these, and we've always had people from different countries, but I feel like we hit our personal record today for the different continents and everything on and all over. So it's so, I don't know. I was saying literally like how cool to have such an international following, right? And I think it's just because what you speak about resonates and means so much to all of the teachers and school professionals and parents, right? Who are just trying to figure out how to do best by the students. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you in October.
All right, sounds good. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Bye.